Well, good morning, St. Andrews. It is a joy to be back with you again. I think it's about a year since I was here last. We get to celebrate the Transfiguration, which is a little bit different for us. We're probably not used to it. Normally, the Transfiguration falls on a weekday because it is always August 6th. This is one of those feast days that is only on the day that it is named, August 6th. So we only do celebrate the Feast of the Transfiguration when August 6th falls on a Sunday. Otherwise, we would do it during the week if you have weekday services. So we might not be completely familiar with this feast day, but you're probably familiar with the story you just heard me read from Luke's Gospel, or from Matthew, or from Mark. Now, this feast day was fixed on August 6th in the 4th century because it was the date that it was believed that the dedication of the very first church on Mount Tabor was made, and that was, we think, where biblical scholars think that the Transfiguration, that this particular story took place. So Jesus and his 3 disciples, Peter, James, and John, they head up to a mountain where Jesus experiences a transformation, a transfiguration, during which our text says his face changes, his clothes become as bright as a flash of lightning. And during all of this, Moses and Elijah appear as well. This had to have been pretty shocking for those disciples. The text notes that they were weighed down with sleep, so you have to wonder if they thought maybe they were having some sort of dream, or maybe they were seeing things because of their exhaustion. I don't know about you, but when I get really, really tired, sometimes I have to think, did I just really do that? Did I just really say that? Did I just really hear that? And I wonder if they might have felt the same thing until they realized, no, that is really what we're seeing. And our tradition teaches us that the Transfiguration, what happened to Jesus in that moment, was it revealed his glory prior to the crucifixion, and it anticipated his resurrection and ascension, which is what we are used to hearing in the stories around Easter. And our story here, it seems to serve as a reinforcement of Jesus' physical presence and of what he has been telling his disciples about who he is and what is to come. Now, it feels weird to talk about this at this time of year, in this season of the year, because normally these readings happen back at the end of Epiphany as we are heading into Lent, because we are nearing the end of Jesus' ministry in this. So what do we get from this at this time of year? We know how it's situated when we're talking about Lent, when we're heading toward the cross, but what does it mean for us as we think about it in this time of year, in the season of Pentecost? Let's think about what it tells us. So in the verses before this passage, Jesus has asked them who they say he is, to which Peter answers, the Messiah. And he has told them about his suffering and death that is to come. And he has told them what it will cost them to follow him. And as is often the case, then, after intense periods of teaching and healing and engagement, which he's been doing leading up to this, Jesus goes off to pray. Now, often he goes alone, but sometimes the disciples go with him, and in this case, James, John, and Peter go with him. And is also often the case, Jesus goes to the mountain to pray, perhaps where he feels closest to God. And that's where we find them this morning. Now, in the story of the Transfiguration, I think we're often drawn to and asked to focus on what happens to Jesus. He's there praying, like he always does, and then all of a sudden, bright lights, visions of ancestors, and he is momentarily physically changed, revealing his glory, his divinity. And the imagery is beautiful, and it must have been breathtaking to Peter, John, and James. But what if we center the story instead, especially at this time of the year, if we think about what happened to them? So we know what happened to Jesus. But these three guys were there too. What was their experience? What if the Transfiguration is not just about an alteration to Jesus, but also a change in the three disciples who were there watching? After months of living with Jesus and serving in his company, their eyes finally saw him in a way they had never seen him before. They saw him in his fullness in that moment. All the things he had been telling them about who he was, about what was to come, was revealed in that moment to them. They were transformed, transfigured too. And I read a commentary about this story that posited that by relocating the Transfiguration from just a change to Jesus into a change happening to the disciples as well, we're seeing the ways in which the Holy Spirit works to show them, to show us, who Jesus is and who he was all along. This has always made so much more sense to me and helped me to better understand this story. Because how could they not be changed by that encounter? You know, they witnessed his miracles, they witnessed his teaching every day as they traveled with him. But we know from many of the questions that they asked that they didn't always get it. And they didn't always hear him when he was telling them, there's an end to come. My end will come. And I think this is one of those times when that started to sink in, and certainly when we read it at the end of Epiphany as we head into Lent. They had, just as Jesus did, a mountaintop experience. Now remember, and we heard briefly of it this morning, the story of Jesus' baptism by John. As he comes up out of the water, he hears a voice from heaven, "This is my Son whom I love. With him I am well pleased." Now to me, those words were not only to the crowd, but also to Jesus. To Jesus from God. Imagine hearing every moment, imagine hearing from the person you love the most, "You are my beloved." And I think Jesus heard that. Here today, in this moment of transformation and transfiguration, we hear a voice, but it seems very directed to the disciples. "This is my Son, my chosen. Listen to him." Again, this is about their transformation, who they will become as well. And sometimes it takes this kind of experience for people to come to believe in God, or at least to entertain the notion that there's something bigger than themselves in this world, that there's something bigger than this state, this city, this country, this earth. People experience the presence of God in the beauty of the mountains, in the vastness of the sea, in the power of a fierce storm. Some of us need an experience that is awe-inspiring, that is breathtaking, even shocking, to open our hearts to the presence of God in our midst. For others, sometimes it's tragedy or hardship that awakens something within us and leads us to an encounter with God in ways that we could not have imagined. For others, it's in the seemingly mundane or the most unlikely experiences that the holy is revealed, that we recognize the presence of God in a profound way, quite unexpected and sometimes quite unprepared for what might happen. Perhaps it's in the kindness of a stranger when we need it the most, a smile, a word of encouragement, the warmth of a much-needed embrace from a friend, the understanding and love of a parent in a difficult conversation. Those are all transformational moments. And it behooves us to pay attention to those. It Because when those happen, that is the presence of God in our midst. That is the presence of God in our hearts. And in our world, we are so quick to move on. All right, great, I was feeling low, but now I'm better, so move on. Remember those moments, though, of transformation, because that's actually how we're called to live. Regardless of how it happens, an encounter with Jesus of God incarnate will change us little by little. We are transformed when our hearts are reoriented toward Jesus and when we choose to follow him. The deeper we go, the more we will experience. And it doesn't happen just once. A life following Jesus, following the teachings of Jesus, continuously learning and growing and bearing witness to his presence in the world around us, are always transformational for us and for those we encounter. A life following him does require something of us, though. Listen to him, God tells those disciples. Listen to him. As Jesus has been teaching all along, discipleship will have a cost. It will not be easy, he tells his followers, but it will be a life that brings love and grace and hope to a hurting world. Like Peter, James, and John, and all of his first followers, this is the life we are called to if we choose to faithfully follow Jesus, to have moments of transformation, transfiguration in ourselves, and to bear witness to those in others. So I would ask you, where have you experienced the presence of God? Think about those times in your life, those moments of kindness. Maybe it was the moment of grief, the moment of beauty on the top of a mountain or by the sea or walking in the woods. Where have you experienced those moments, and what did it do for you? How did it change your heart? If we pay attention to those and allow those to mount and build within us, that's how we go deeper and deeper and deeper into our walk with Jesus, and how we become more like him when we are out in the world. Think about your first encounter with God. The first time you knew for sure, I am in the presence of something holy. Mine was in a little room in Adams Morgan in D.C. in the Festival Center, at a table with a whole bunch of folks who were coming out of either rehab, coming out of incarceration, coming out of really challenging places in their lives. And I had joined this group at the invitation of a friend, and the man who led the group had been incarcerated for the better part of 40 years off and on, and he was now in his 60s, and he was leading this group. And I was one of the few people in the room who hadn't had the experiences that all the rest of them recognized in one another. And at the end, after we had had a really great conversation, he prayed. And he remembered every single thing each of us lifted up during that meeting, and he offered every single one of them up in prayer. And then at the end, as he asked God's blessing, he said, "God, please bless those who are less fortunate than we are." And I thought, wow, there are a lot of folks sitting at this table who I might have before that moment thought are maybe less fortunate than I am. And yet Ali was realizing that there are so many others whose lives needed to be transformed like his. And mine was one of them. And that was a transformational moment for me. I realized I had met Jesus. And it changed the trajectory of my life. And now I can look back and find many moments like that throughout my life. And I hold on to them. And I write them down when I remember to do so, because that's what transformation does to us. So I encourage you to think about your experience of God. Think about how your heart needs to be reoriented. We all need to reorient our hearts on every single day as we grow deeper and deeper, closer and closer to the God who made us. And think about how we can live that transformational experience out in the world and share it with others, because that is what we are called to do. That's what Peter, James, and John, as they left that mountain with Jesus, did for the rest of their lives, even when they couldn't say his name and couldn't claim that they owned him. Remember, Jesus built his church on Peter.